That's very brief introduction. So, welcome everybody. My name is Emmanuel Rockson. I'm a senior product designer at Hubtel. And I'll be basically. I hope you can see my screen.
Yes, we can see your screen.
Okay. So I'll basically be talking about design systems and how we build one, why you need one, and then we'll also look at like the value of design systems basically. There are also some interesting facts or facts about design systems that we'll talk about. But first of all, let's just try and define design systems. So it's been um, it's been so popular these days. Design systems, or design systems. If you go everywhere, you hear a design system. If you go to even a new startup set, you'll see, oh, we want to build a design system. We want to do this. We want to do that, and it's basically being popularized by these big brands or these big boys. Shopify has their own design system they call Polaris. Atlassian too has theirs. Apple and of course Google have theirs also, which are the most popular ones. And then also governments actually have some governments actually have a design system that they use to build their websites, like the United States of America. Let's actually look at some of them and then just get a fair idea of what's in it, and before we go on. So let me see if I can bring something. Oh, let's just stop sharing. All right. So first of all, this is like Google's material design, right? It's actually, if you notice, it's actually like a whole web page. They have components, they have app bars, so many things. At the very top, you see design components, develop, and then resources, and then a blog about it. Um, if you go deeper, you'll find that it's very well documented. It has like basically everything that you need to build an app or to design an app or a product, a finished product for use for by users. Same for human interface guidelines. This is by Apple, and they also have their own principles that they use. We'll talk about principles, so that they use to build out the whole design system that we all use. There's also this one from the US, which I mentioned earlier. They have their own design system, and there's a showcase here to show you how it's or which websites have been used. You could go inside, kind of view um, all of them, and then of course there's also Atlassian's uh, design system. And you notice that in all the four examples that I showed, there's one common thing involved. It's like it's highly documented, it's very detailed, right? It has so many components, uh, so much text to just make sure that everybody is um, understands what's happening in the design system. So we'll go back. Let me go back to the presentation. So I'll stop sharing for a bit and go back to the preview. All right. So now, what really is a design system? So a design system is simply just a set of brand values, design principles, standards, documentation, and UI components that meets those standards. So you notice that when we went to see all of these brands design systems, they always started with like something relating to the brand or the reason why they chose to build out this whole system. So that's those kind of values and principles is what affects um, the entire design system as a whole. So you'll probably be saying that it's by this definition, it's actually like a style guide, but it's not a style guide. It's totally different, and we'll talk about that. Now, the design systems that people build are usually used by either internal team members or an external team member. So, for example, Microsoft Fluent UI is used to build out PowerPoint, Excel, Word, and so on and so forth. And then external people also use it. So, like WhatsApp uses human interface guidelines to build out their apps for Apple devices, and then they use Google's material design for the Android devices. And like I said, it's actually not a style guide. So I'll show you the difference right now. So the difference is usually a style guide will be focused on the graphic style. So like the colors, the fonts, the illustrations, and how you use those graphic elements. You would also typically use like a style guide in the early stages of a product. So when you are trying to find product market fit, you want to use a style guide so that you can quickly design and test your solutions and make sure you are actually sending out the right or dishing out the right solutions. Then style guides are usually like static. They rarely evolve. You won't see a style guide version 1 and then you see style guide version 2. It's once it's done, it's done. It will rarely be updated with new things. A design system, however, it's more comprehensive when it comes to documentation. So when went to the websites, we saw that it was so detailed. There were code elements in there, code snippets in there, and guides on how to use all of the codes and the designs that they've done. Then it was also driven by principles. So based on what they say or what the brand believes in, they build out the components or they choose their style guide, the colors, the fonts, and illustrations, all based on those principles. Right. And then a design system will always be evolving. So when you go to Google's material uh, design system right now, at the very top you see that they are about to roll out version 3 of the whole design system. So it means that they've been working on it continuously since they launched it, and it's now reached a point where they need to go to version 3. And all of these changes were based on user feedback and research that the usability tests that they did. Right. So what really is the value of a design system to you as a designer and your organization? Um, just like how style guides would help you build very fast, um, design systems will boost that kind of speed. So it will make everything super like easy for you to do. You can design at a very large scale. So if you have a team of like 20 spread across the world, you are fine if you have a design system because it'll be easy to. There are always reusable components and documentation for other designers to refer to. Um, and because you are able to build at that large scale and you have reusable components, UI components, you also boost like the time that your product goes or your solutions go to market. So if um if your competitors like release new features and stuff and it kind of affects your products, you can quickly just refer to your design system, pick up some components, drop the feature into your app, and then ship it out, and then later test, do usability tests to make sure that it actually works for your users, and then refine it some more until you get the right fit for your users. Then you also create a unified language within and across teams. So like I was saying earlier, if you have like a team of 20 people, designers spread across the country, let's say one guy is in Russia and you are in Ghana, you the time difference alone, sorry, the time difference alone will allow you, the senior, to be able to like approve and tell the junior that no, this is the wrong thing to do or this is the right thing to do. And so because you have it all documented and written for him to use, he will just refer to it and there won't be um, miscommunications or mistakes with your product. Right? Then it also brings a little bit of team focus. So because they are reusable elements already, components already, the team would really not focus on stuff like menial stuff like colors. This color needs to be this way, the shadow needs to be. It's already defined, and so they would focus mainly on bigger things. The team will focus mainly on bigger things like usability issues. Maybe someone is not able to find a certain feature. Like those are the issues that the team will then be able to focus on. Right. However, design systems are good, but however, they are really not for everybody. Like not every product really needs a design system, or not every team also needs a design system. It's mainly for growing design teams where it started out as two and you keep going and you keep going, growing, then you need a design system. Um, Products feature teams that are like, so in Hubtel, for example, we have teams that are dedicated to certain features, right? And we have designers dedicated to certain features in Hubtel. What that does is usually they would get like requirements from stakeholders like individually as a team for them to build. Once they are building, there's really no time for the senior to like give feedback on how the UI components look. So a team like or a company like Hubtel actually needs one because there are multiple teams with dedicated designers for each feature. Then also platform type of projects that have like multiple actors and teams involved will benefit greatly from design systems. So in Google's example, they have like I think over 2,000 employees, right? And because it's a platform, they are like businesses coming on board trying to use their APIs and stuff. There are so many things like people want to build apps with on Android, and so to manage all of that uh, cost, right, technical cost, you just build a design system and use that to manage that cost. Then, how would you create a design system? And before that, you would have to uh, be aware that there are design systems out there already. So I showed examples from Google, Atlassian. There are uncommon ones like Chakra UI, Untitled, Semantic UI, and some other stuff. Right? Bootstrap is also a design system. You would need to consider whether you want what you're about to do would actually benefit the product, because design systems take time and money and a lot of effort for it to be realized. So you would want to think whether you want to adopt an existing design system, which means that you would pick, let's say, Google Material Design and then stick to it and use that to build your product, or you would adapt to that design system where you pick the design system, you modify it a little or you customize it a little, and then you use it for your product, or you can create your own custom system, maybe because the needs of your team or your product really requires that you need like a whole new design system. Maybe there's some color that you want, and so you're not getting it in material guidelines. And so you prefer to build out your own design system. There are pros and cons, but this image from Nelson and Norman Group kind of simplifies it for us. So if you choose to adopt an already existing design system, it will be low cost as opposed to creating a design system which will just be very high cost. There is also less customization for adopting an existing design system, but more for when you create your own design system. Then there's also a low brand differentiation. So if someone strictly sticks to Google's material design, you realize the app looks like it's from Google. So if you watch WhatsApp, if not for the brand, their color and stuff, you would realize that it looks almost like a product from Google or Apple. Like it just looks very similar. But when you decide to create your own, then you can put like extreme different. You can show the extreme differentiation between your brand and the platform that you are working with. So like Airbnb has their own is it Circles design system or something like that, and it looks like it's totally Airbnb. It's what they represent, right? Then you also need to assemble a team. So basically, you need a very large team to build out the design system. But the minimum, that I think you would require are designers, front end developers, content strategists, researchers, product managers, and then a few stakeholders. So the designers here would help to define the visual and UI elements of the system. Front end developers will just create a modular and efficient code for the system. They will translate the designs that the designer does into reusable code elements. And there's a whole technical process for that's where you have to make sure the code that you are writing is reusable, it's easily understood, and it's very fast. It's optimized for use. Content strategies here would help you to write the content that is in the design system to make sure that it's if a newbie comes to their company, they read the design system and they understand what's going on. Or even if third parties, you decide to build out your design system for a third party, they will understand what you are saying just by reading it, right? Researchers here. Sorry. So for researchers in the team, what they will do is to help you understand like what the customer basically needs. So they will help you with all of your usability tests, accessibility tests, and find out what they actually need, whether they need a new design to help cater for their certain solution or not. That's what the researchers are there for. And the product managers are here to ensure that the system is aligning with the customer needs. So the customer and then the business needs. Because without a leader, and the product manager here will be the leader. Without a leader, a team is thrown into chaos, and everything that you build will actually not be successful. Right? Then you have also the stakeholders whose job is to make sure that the higher ups in the organization are aligned to the design system and everybody else in the company as well. There are also models for design systems. Right. The first model is, or let me just say, these models are basically based on how the team is structured, the team that builds the design system is structured. So we have the solitary model where there's just one person who is who is working on the design system and then feeds it to the other teams and other users of the platform. He's like an overlord, right? of the design system. Then there's a centralized model where all of the team members that I mentioned earlier would come together and work on the design system together and then share it or ship it out to people to use. Then there's the distributed model where you pick team members from across various feature teams and then have them work on the design system and then also share it with their fellow team members. There are advantages and disadvantages to all of them. So the solitary one will be very fast for you to build a design system, but the overload the overload will be a bottleneck for you. So what that means is if you when you want to do a change on a design system and he's kind of busy with doing something else, you cannot do that change, and that will kind of in turn affect your product and its success, right? Then for centralized models, the system is very well maintained because there's a dedicated team that's always attending to it. They are always refining it, making sure that it meets the customer's needs. However, it may not really meet those needs because they they don't really interact with the user, right? So the research that they do might not really reflect what it actually is on the ground when it comes to usability and accessibility. Then for distributed, it gives you great insights to like the product and the user needs because the team members are actually working on the real product, right? The only disadvantage here is it's very slow to build out a design system that way because the team members are also responsible for shipping out features, right? So the time that you'll probably need a change on the design system, they will be working on a feature that would kind of um, hinder the progress of the design system, right? Then there are also types of design systems. There are strict systems which are comprehensive and fully synchronized with design and development. Adding features and scaling the app must align with the system rules. So it's like the name says, it's very strict. When we build it, this is what you have to use, whether you like it or yes. That's the one that you have to use. So if we design a card or we use a color that is not friendly to a user's eye, that's what you have to use because that's how we build the design system. Then there are also loose systems they provide more flexibility for experimentation and creative freedom. These systems be, these systems mainly create to serve they are created mainly to serve like a framework. So like I'm trying to find an example. I think Atlassian and human interface guidelines are like great examples of this because when you take a component from it, you could change it a little if you want. You add a little bit of some customization to it to make sure that it fits your needs. Then there are modular systems which are basically used by e-commerce platforms. So Shopify's Polaris would be a good example. And what the type of system that is you can pick elements or components from a larger component set and reuse it for a certain need, a certain user need, just because that would work for that need. Then there are integrated systems that mainly serve as a showcase for things like portfolio. So if Michael decides to run for president or Sam decides to run for president and we need to build out some websites and some products for them, we'll quickly dish out a design system that would guide other designers across the country to build out those products. Right. So that's for integrated systems. Then now, after understanding all of this, you now actually start the process of building out a design system. And the first thing that you do is to take inventory. What you do here is you look at that. If your product is something that already exists, then this is the first step that you should do. If it's a new thing and you think you can build a design system for it, you can go for it. But once the product exists, you need to take inventory. You need to take inventory of the visual attributes and then the UI elements. Visual attributes here is like spacing, color, the typography that you are using, the styles of the typography, the icon size, the image size, every single visual element, the shadows and everything. You take an inventory of those and then you put them down. Then you do same for um, UI elements. So over here, you can see at the top here, we have this is like a very simple spacing thing. So you went through your app, you saw that there's 2 pixels in code, right? Then you do the same for buttons also. Um, when you document it, what you can do is to add counters to indicate how many times you've used um, those buttons, right? This will help you to understand the, the design depth that you have, how you know that you really don't need certain buttons, like you really don't need this rounded button or because it's just used once and it doesn't really make any sense to have it, right? So that's what this the inventory taking the inventory would do. Then you would also do after taking the inventory, you would perform research into the identity, the design principles, and the best practices in terms of accessibility for the brand. So you talk to stakeholders, um, team members, users. You talk to the necessary people that you need to understand what the brand is or who the brand is to be able to build out the design system. Because once you understand that the entire design system is going to be built based on that principle or those principles, right? Because let's say um, um, there's an app called Snow, right? And what Snow does is they mean to create products for designers to make their work easier. Because one of what they want to do is for designers, they feel that one of their values is to make sure every product that they bring out is very beautiful. And so that becomes like an identity for them. That becomes something that they want to achieve with in terms of the design of their products. That's that value or that belief would then affect the principles that you use. So maybe you want to um, use spacing, right? Because they want it. Snow wants their apps to be very beautiful. You would probably rethink how you use spacing. You think of things like the golden ratio to help you make sure that the design is very it follows a certain rhythm, right? When it comes to spacing, you'd want to use that principle to guide you in selecting the colors that you want to use. You would use maybe bright colors because you want it to be very attractive, or you can use a lot of white because that's what designers prefer. At least I do, and so on and so forth. Then you would also use that said value or principle to define your accessibility. So where you put buttons and stuff like that would depend on how what the brand identifies as. So if we want things to be easy, we'll just put things buttons at the bottom. It's that simple. If you go to Atlassian, the design system, you notice that they've highlighted um, their personality. They have a mission, promise, values, and this is what I'm actually referring to. So you would want to also include all of this documentation in there, and that's where the content strategies will come in to help you document all of these things. Um, then you would use these principles once you are done with gathering these principles, and um, brand guides and brand values and principles. You would use that to build out your visual language. So here we talk about color psychology, which colors to use. Do you want to use bright colors? Do you want to use dark colors? Or you don't want to use any color at all, so you want to stick to neutrals, like based on what the brand values. You want to use that to also influence the type of typography that you choose. If the brand wants to be fun, you should probably look for a fun font to use, maybe Comic Sans or something, right? Um, you would also use that to also affect the type scale. So type scale here is, let me see if I can share. Stop sharing. Yeah. So type scale is like how, if you sorry, if you notice here, it's just basically like a scale, right? But what that does is you define a certain figure that you multiply your base fonts with, and then you scale it up. So every time you multiply, that becomes the next level. So I think over here it's no H1. Let me try and grab this. Doesn't say H1. Okay, so this would help you to kind of define your H1s, your H2s, your headers, your display fonts, and all of those things, the sizes of each of those elements. I think the best that I prefer is the major tail or the golden ratio, but depending on what you want or what the brand actually wants, then um, you determine a type space or a type scale for it. We share this one. All right, then you also define images. So how you take images or how you use images. So if the brand wants to be bright like MCN, you want to use like yellow or warm tones to in your photography, right? Same for icons. If the brand wants to be bright, just like MTN uses a lot of yellows and bright colors to kind of influence or depict that. Then you would also do, depending on the brand's needs, you'd add visual forms like shadows, rounded corners, and then motion and then sound, right? Depending on what the brand actually needs. Then there's the all-important design tokens. So design tokens here are just name and value pairs stored as data to abstract the design properties that you want to manage. So you would give like your developers, or you and your developers or the engineer would come together, sit down and agree to certain names and values to store for each little component that you are building. So if we look at Salesforce Lightning design, they highlight, they have tokens for um, their colors. So over here it says brand, the token name is brand accessible, and then there are certain values tied to that value. Right? So that's basically a summary of design token. And you know, there's also tokens for everything. So it's not just color. They have font size, they have opacity, media query, and stuff like that. Right. Then now you would have to build your component library. I'm using component library here because, like I mentioned earlier, design systems actually have like code in it. A pattern library is basically what we designers will build or design in Figma or in XD or Sketch or wherever. But a component library would have actual code or functional code attached to it. You can group these components based on like visual attributes or UI elements. Right? Those two. Then there is also the very popular atomic design um, principles by Brad Frost, where he basically says every single thing that you do is a component and can be arranged according to atoms, molecules, organisms, and so on and so forth, templates and pages. What it means is for atoms, for an atom, you would probably have like a color, maybe a certain shape, and then some text, right? Then when you put the let's say this is an icon rather, then you put the icon, the text, and then the button or the shape together to form a molecule which will be a button. Then a group of those buttons would be an organism, right? A button group would be an organism. And then you would use elements across from each of these, whether it's an atom or a molecule or an organism, to create templates like empty state templates or page templates, contents blocks and stuff like that. Then an arrangement or a certain order of that, those templates will just become pages for you. That's basically atomic design, right? Um, what tools can you use? You, I was talking about Figma, Sketch, and X over here. Some of it. Actually, depends on what you want to do or how the team wants to work. Right? If you feel XD is the way forward for you, go for it. If you feel InVision is the best, go for it. It actually depends on how you want to work as a team. But what you typically use the design tools for is to organize, design, and document and share the design system. Organize here because the design system is very broad. It covers a lot of UI components and visual attributes and stuff like that. You need to organize it in a certain way for people to really understand. When it comes there, they just understand what's going on, and that will ensure the success of your design system. You would also use the tools to design. So as auto layout, the best tool out there or the best feature out there for to help us like just really design things or design components. You'd also use that same tool to document. So you can use pages in let's say Sketch, right? To group like um, the components into whether you want it to be grouped as atoms or you want to group it as molecules, whatever. You'd use the pages feature in, I think it's in XD and sorry, it's in Figma and Sketch. So you would use, and I think in design, InVision as well. So you would use the pages to kind of group or arrange or organize those kind of components. Then you would also document, share the design file or the design system file itself. So how would someone create team libraries and code? All of those things you need to consider before you pick a tool that you want to use. Once you build the component, it doesn't just end there by how you design it. You will have to, like I said, document what you've done and why and how to use that said component. So in material design, what they do is they they design the component and then give you a little anatomy of that component. So over here we see a card which is labeled, and right sorry right below it, they explain what that means. So they say they call it a container, and it contains like basically the card elements and their size. And their size is determined by the space their elements occupy, right? That's what they do. You have to give a detailed description of what you built, like what's the components that you've created. You have to provide those details. You could use plugins like red lines in Figma to give to define spacing for that component, or margins for that component. You'd also want to document how it behaves. So over here, you want to design the different states for that component, whether when there's an error for a button, how does it look like, or a form field, how does it look like? You not want to define how, if you want to introduce motion, how the text will animate in if there's an error, right? You have to define all of that in your component um, for it to be used in the design system. So you would continue this process, or you redo this process for every single components that you need. And remember, because you've already taken an inventory of what you actually need. This might not really be so difficult to like find or to build out because you already know what you are doing. But if it's a new product and you don't really know what we are going to build for people, it will be very difficult to say that let's use a card and put the image on the right. Right. It will be very difficult to do that. But once you have an existing product, it will be very easy for it to do that because you already have data to support your findings or your design. Right. Then sorry. A design system is also it's a product, right? That keeps evolving. You don't just do a design system and you forget about it. You would have to keep researching into the components, test the usability of those components, and make sure it's actually working or serving the purpose. You would use actionable feedback from users and to design new or improve the design of the design system. So I mentioned that Google is launching Material 3, and it's based on feedback that came up. I'm pretty sure no one ever allows the hard shadows, right? So they are probably getting rid of those shadows, hopefully, for us. You'd also want to keep a change log, and in a change log, you document every single change that you make to the design system or to the component, So if you change the font size in a card, a UI card, you'd want to document that you've changed it because of A, B, C, right? You'd also want to provide like evidence to back what you are saying or why you did it, if need be. Then you would also do version control where if you make a major change, that would require it to be like a super version, for lack of a better word. If you do minor changes, then there will be the 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, and so on and so forth. Then once you release the design system, you would also need to add release notes to inform people like where to go to find what or how it's used or why anything that you want to add in your release notes. You'd want to do that as well. So so in summary, design systems basically help you to design for scalability. Right? If you have products and ship them faster if you have a design system. It's also not for every product, and so you want to think through why you need a design system before you actually build them, because it actually costs time, money, and they use a lot of resources or efforts to build a design system. You'd also want to always make sure you are keeping the principles that you gathered in mind. So what the brand believes in or the values of the brand, you always want to make sure that it's always kept in the building of those UI components. Then it also helps you to bridge the gap between design and development, where the developer will say, Charlie, we don't have this component, so you have to do, or we have this problem, so you have to build out a new component or something. You just refer them to the design system, tell them you could use this one to solve that problem, and everything, all of that go back and forth with the developer subside. Then you would also have to treat it like a product. Make sure you are announcing changes to the relevant users of the design system, right? So whether it's internal or external, you want to make sure they are aware of all the changes that's happening to that design system. So that's basically a very compressed form of design systems, information for design systems. And so if there are any questions, clarifications needed.
Thank you very much for the presentation, Roxanne. So, I'd like to know if anyone has a question for Roxanne before I start asking mine. So, please, if you have a question, kindly feel free to unmute and then ask your question. Okay. Okay, Maxwell, kindly unmute to ask your question.
Hello.
Hello?
Can I be heard?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, Roxon. I was wondering if you have a sample design system you want to share. I saw the presentation that
A sample what?
I want. I think you know that episode. That is
Sorry,
I
didn't.
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't get you. I think your line is.
I think. Is it better now?
I think so.
Yeah, I was wondering if you have a sample system you've worked on, probably in Figma or XD. You want to walk us through as you've done for the presentation. I think we'd appreciate that too. That is if you have one.
I have one, but I can't really share it with you. So I shared some examples from Google material guidelines, human interface, Atlassian. They are all great examples of what we are saying. So let me go back to sharing that. All right, so sorry. So this is Google's material design guidelines. It's actually a website to read the whole documentation. So I'll just walk, for the sake of Maxwell's question, I'll just walk us through it and then point out the things that I mentioned. So you notice it has a name, first of all. Obviously, it's called Material Design Guidelines. Then they have a design section here, which talks about like the principles or why they are building the design system, right? So create intuitive. They are building so that people can create intuitive and beautiful products with material design, right? They have a section here for theming, iconography, text, and go. If you go down, you notice that they have a sort of release notes, right, based on the feedback they are getting. So they have a what's new section here, and it talks about design updates and guidance that they've done, design built for. It's just basically a blog kind of thing that they put here. And they have articles here as well to help support all of these things. Right. Then when you go inside the site now, we would see introduction, which I think is where I am. They basically talk into details more about design or their principles, what material is it, if you don't know what material is, they basically say it's inspired by, I think somewhere, it's inspired by real life art, yeah. Inspired by the physical world and its textures, including how they reflect light and cast shadows. And that's why they have elevation on the cards. Right? So this is like an example of a principle. And as you can see here, it says principle. It's an example of a principle that affected how they built the material guideline or design. So if you watch here, you will notice that this title would have a shadow because they believe that light has been cast on it, and there is some form of a shadow that needs to be present. So that's what they do in terms of using principles. If you go into components, you'd see they have up bars, so on and so forth. And every single one that you go into would have what I was showing you. They have the code. This is actually code, so I think it works. Oh, not here. They have some functional elements here. Not here. But they basically have all of the documents or everything that you need to understand what this card component is. Like they tell you how you can use it, the usage, the principles behind it, spontaneous, independent, individual. They show you the anatomy, which I showed earlier. And over here, they have the container labeled accordingly. They have the thumbnail, header text. Like if you notice, it's very detailed and very exhaustive. So I'm not sure we can really go into designing one per se on the core, right? But if you go through or if you understand everything that I said, it's basically a design system will basically be built on principles, core principles, and uh, the brand values. Right. So once you understand that principle in building out a design system, you should be good to go.
Okay, hello Adam. Kindly unmute to ask your question.
Can I ask now?
Yes, you can ask.
Sorry,
Yes.
there's a lot of noise in my where I am, so pardon the ambient noise. So there's this one thing that I experienced when creating a design system, which was that there wasn't a lot of buy-in from the stakeholders. Like executive support wasn't really high, and it made things really difficult because you're essentially managing. Once the design system is done, it's essentially a closed project, right? But you're still working on it. So I was just wondering, from Roxanne's experience, like in trying to work on one at Hubtel, how has the buy-in from stakeholders, like the C-level kind of executive support, how has it been like for him, and how has he sort of navigated that? Because it seems to be a problem across a lot of teams, and I even experienced that same thing myself. So that's basically my question. I don't know if it was clear.
Yeah, it was. So, in my experience at Hubtel, when we started, we actually didn't know. So, if you remember, Hubtel rebranded from SMSG to Hubtel, what's currently known as Hubtel. We came with a lot of design depth, right? And we decided to build out a new product based on some information that we have. I can't really go into details on the kind of information that we did that. Once we started, we needed to make sure we are aligning to the markets. We need to make sure we find product market fit. And so once we started, we basically started like in every other startup. We built out a style guide to guide us in the design of certain apps, like individual apps, because we felt like the uses of those individual apps were a little bit different. They were different from each other, and the way you want to present things to them would be different, right? So we built out a style guide, and as time went on, we realized that there were like a lot of inconsistency in the app. If you go to, basically the team grew, right? And if you went to a certain part of the app, you'll notice that it feels different. It's like the designer brought his own style and applied it to it. If you go to another section of the app, there's a different designer working on it, and so he has his own style to apply to that section of the app. And so we realized that we needed to, or the design team realized we needed to sit down and refine our style guide, right? And we stumbled on design systems as a way to go. So what we did there is to kind of talk to stakeholders, that's the senior staff members, to kind of let them understand that, or actually, I think they came first to say they noticed a little bit of inconsistency, so we should do something about it. And we went back to them with the solution, a design system or componentization, if I think that's the way, right? Where we will build out components and reuse them from henceforth or from that moment. It was not an easy thing to convince them to let us do that, because it meant that it was a very small team. It meant that we needed some resources to be pulled off certain features for that to be done. And it was not really sitting well with stakeholders that we needed to find the product market fit, and you guys are just there doing design things, like, usual stakeholder stuff. It took some convincing, and after a while, or after a very long time, we are actually building out a design system right now to make sure that all our design systems are working. I think basically it's the role of the designer to make stakeholders understand the value, or not just the designer and the team, that's including engineering, PMs, and UX writers, to make sure that the stakeholders understand the value that the design system would bring. So once you are able to do that, to explain the value or give value to a design system to the stakeholder, I think you'll be fine to go. Good to go. Maxwell. Yeah.
Can I be heard?
Yes.
Okay, great. Rockson, in your submission, you made mention that design system kind of helps a team to churn out consistent features and whatnot. And as you know, and as you said in your presentation, this is work done by not just an individual, but a team, which could be multiple designers and whatnot. And I know we all know that designers do have their own style of finesse or flair when it comes to the way that they do. So the question is, when the team comes together to build a design system, is that to say that this effort needs to vary the flair or the style of each and every individual designer, or how is that going to play out? Because I think what makes one stand out is what they bring to the
table. I think that's like. Oh, please finish.
Yeah, so I'm saying that. So in trying to build a system, and with all this issues and complications, how do you fix that, or how does the team come together to decide on a given style of field to go?
So, like I said, the design system is usually built based on principles, the brand's principles. So, it's the job of the product manager to make sure that everybody is aligned, including the various designers in the project. Or the lead designer in the project needs to make sure everybody is aligned to that those set of goals. It it actually takes a while for it takes some time for people to get used to like design systems. So, for example, if you were to start, if you were to get a contract from someone to build out a design, an app, and he insisted that you would use, let's say, Chakra UI to build out the app for him because he likes the way they design their philosophy or something. It would actually take you a while to learn to go to Chakra UI, read their documentation, understand what it is before you can actually build a true Chakra UI based app. It takes a lot of effort or some effort for that to be realized. So when you start, it's going to take some time, like for the team to be aligned. But eventually, if you keep pushing, making sure everybody is aligned to it, you keep correcting people, they would definitely realign and the whole objective of the design system will be met. Um, However, I need to note that creativity here is like stifling creativity. Um, I think there's a myth that says design systems stifle creativity. It's actually a myth. Like it's not true. If you look at Google's material design, you can see the various apps that have come from it. Like there's so much creativity that has just dropped from when they released the material design in version one. I think when was it? The early 2000s. In the late 2000s, right? It's it's actually a myth. Like there's nothing like that. Like a design system will block you from being creative. It's not true. You actually can be creative with what you do. Just that the style needs to reflect what the brand wants. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. So in that case, in building the system like that, I believe the structure you gave, the product lead will be the one to ensure that the principles are being adhered to. Or
Yes.
who does that to make sure?
Yes, you can leave it to the lead, but ideally everybody should be responsible for their work. And so if this is what I'm doing, I need to be dedicated to it, make sure I'm also aligned to it, making sure that the product lead is also aligned to it. So when he comes and says that, Charlie, we are doing this, you need to ask him for evidence. Like, why is he changing it? Why is he doing that? You need to ask because we've already defined components for what you are saying, but you want to do something different. So like you question the lead if it doesn't get you fired. You can do that, right? To make sure everybody is aligned.
Okay. Does anyone else have any more questions they'd like to ask before we wrap up today's session? Okay, Adam, you can ask.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So, like, one challenge that basically, I just want to find out that what's your biggest challenge with design systems? I know mine has been the design principles. Like, anytime I'm starting one, I really struggle with them because I know just a couple. I'll be honest. So, depending on the kind of product you're working on, the principles might be different. So, I just want to find out, in your case, what has been your biggest struggle with design systems?
If I would say anything, it would probably be motion. Because I really don't understand like motion when it comes to like development per se. I really don't understand how an element moves on a screen. I don't understand how it works. And so it's been a very big challenge for me, motion especially. For other designers, it could be anything. It could be colors, it could be typography, it could be anything, literally anything. But there are actually tools out there that would help to kind of curb all of these things. So I showed type scale to help you define uh, your typographic skills or the modular skills. Um, you could go to, is it colors, to help you generate a color palette. Like there are so many tools out there right now that kind of help people to um, develop or design certain aspects that they are finding it difficult. Of course, you can reach out to um, fellow designers or other people to help you out when you get stuck. For the brand itself, you would have to actually talk to, uh, do research, like talk to the business stakeholders. If you sit there and decide to write principles based on what you think, you find it very, I think you find it very difficult. But once you talk to them, have a sort of a discovery session where you sit them down, ask them about like questions about the business. You have to be like in the business mind at that point to understand what they want, and you would note like a few words that they'll keep saying. So if you spoke to a stakeholder and he kept saying, using the word minimal, 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 it means that he prefers things that are minimal, and so that would be like a design principle for you to apply to the design system. But for the rest, I think there are basically a lot of tools out there to help achieve those elements. Does that help?
Yeah, that's actually quite insightful. But I was wondering if maybe other people on the call probably might have other challenges that they might want to share. Because I want to know what people are struggling with.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, boss Sam. I can hear.
Oh, Rockson. So yeah, that's to that. I think for me also it's mainly about the motion, similar to Roxanne, or Roxanne said. So understanding like how things move on the screen and like the principles of motion, not just you trying to just like move to animate something in Figma just for it to move from one another. Because it's a different conversation when you're auto animating than when you are actually implementing the design code. So understanding that whole thing and how it works, that's one huge challenge. And also when you're building out a design system from scratch, because I recently did that, one key thing is to know which elements to actually start with in the first place instead of just trying to do everything at a go. So for example, if you are building an icon system within a design system, knowing which types of icons to begin with, especially if it's a new startup which has like no real data or no existing designs yet. So you are practically like the first designer to build stuff, knowing the things to begin with, and then going ahead to do those things. So that's also one challenge. One thing that could help, or that helped me, was that I just decided to redesign some of the things because when I came here it was mainly developers' work. There was no designer. As I was designing, I realized some of the things that I would need, and I also sort of got a feel of what I would need in the future and what could help other designers once they come on board, and then added them to the design system. So that's also one of the challenges, like scoping out the requirements, not just what you need at that point, but what you need ahead in like a couple of months time once the design team or the team gets bigger. Yeah.
Yeah, that's very true. That's very true. So to add to what Sam is saying, I think I mentioned that when you are starting, when it's a new startup, it's a fresh product, there's nothing to design off from or to reference from. It's very difficult to determine what you actually need to meet user needs because there's there's nothing. There's literally nothing. You don't know what you are building. You don't even know whether you need a bottom sheet or not. Like you wouldn't know until you actually start building out a product. And so for me, the advice I would give here is you should probably, if it's a new product, an entirely new product, you should probably start by building out a style guide to guide you to 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 design for the brand. Because a style guide will basically have the first part of the design system. Then, as you build along, you build a product, you document what is happening or which components that keep repeating. You document those ones and then try and apply them to other use cases as well. So, but if it's an existing product, then your work is cut out for you. All you have to do is gather a few team members and have them conduct like an inventory, take stock of what components that exist in the product, and then you know that okay, you don't need this round button because there's no point in it. Like you just use it once, like I was saying, or you don't need this color in the product because it actually doesn't reflect what the brand wants to achieve. So those are like great tips to kind of help you when you are trying to build out a design system. I think Maxwell, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I want to say something, but I think Roxanne has said it better. It's just with the issue that I think some made mention of when he was talking about his challenges. I think it's premature scaling to even think of building a design system when there isn't a product. So, from experience and what I've observed and read, I think it's wise to go ahead to build a product. As time goes on, realize that there are certain things that components that keep repeating themselves. Most of the pages or the templates that you have. So from there, by what you have, then you start building the components or the system out of that. Than to set the time aside to think of what you need and all that. You might not even, it could be that right now you're thinking of building a system and you might think you need a card or a certain button, but in the future, you realize that you didn't need that thing. So I think the advice here I would say is to go ahead, build a product, and with time, you start breaking them apart into components and whatnot. So yeah. So that's what I was going to say.
Yeah, all right. So,
Yes, so this is a question. So this goes towards both the designer and the developer. I know Max is a developer, so you can also chip in. So the thing is, once you've built out the components and everything in your tool, your design tool, your Figma and everything. So how do you go about on the developer's side? What's the process of implementing those components into real interactive code on the developer side? I mean, what are some of the tools that you recommend, especially if you are in a team where maybe there are some people in there who are probably new to that, and so what are some of the tools that you recommend as a developer to build out design systems?
So I'm asking you, right?
Yep.
Right. So again, it depends on the product you are building. If it happens to be web, I think most people are using React. That's the UI framework when it comes to web development, and others are also using Vue.js. So once the design system has been created by designers, and you have every component and the tools and everything spelled out, then you decide on which components you want, which front end framework you want to go on. So if it's React, then you start building from ground up. You have to decide on the tools you need. You have to decide on how even the components, you are going to write the components, because you have to write in such a way that tomorrow, if there's a need for you to extend it or to create a variant of that particular component, you wouldn't find yourself wanting. So that's how it starts. When it comes to, let's say you're building for mobile. So mobile for Android, recently Google introduced a new view framework that is Java Compose. So it makes it easy for engineers to build components from design systems. And when you're also working on iOS, there's just UI where you can also build your components from that. So yeah, it depends on the product you're building. And once, I think the design system from the designers would have to come first before engineers will even take up to go and build components, because if there isn't any blueprint, there wouldn't be anything so that, I mean, it depends on what you are building. And once you are clear on that, then you also have to organize and plan how you're going to go about that. So, yeah.
Thank you. And one final question for me. So this also goes to Roxanne. I faced a challenge just yesterday or within this week. So when it comes to the icons, right? So you see in Figma, you name it. There's a naming convention where you are able to sort of create various properties for a specific icon. So you can group them into whether it's a line icon and the size and the color and whatnot, right? But when you're exporting it, it doesn't really export the whole that naming convention, right? It just exports it into folders, unless you use a different type of naming convention where you use either a dot or underscore or whatever. That exports the icon with that naming, that type of naming. So my question here is, so for the devs, right, and also for the designers, right? So how do you make that communication clear? So in case you want to make a change to a specific icon, right, or you want to communicate to the dev that this icon should be this instead of what it currently is in the platform, how do you communicate when, in this case, where the icon you've exported doesn't have the same naming convention, probably in the development side as it does in the Figma? Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah. Okay. I think I can come in now. Then Roxanne would. Yeah. So the document that Roxanne was talking about, I think the presentation, I don't think it's just for designers and stakeholders and whatnot. It's for everyone. And he also made mention that if there's a change log attached to the system. So if there's a change, you can refer to that particular page and be sure of what has changed. So if there's a breaking change, let's say all the naming convention for the icons that we already used, let's say in version 1 has changed, then we have to come to an agreement that there has to be like a different version, because the breaking change, and should we go with that, it's going to affect all the product we have. And that will be made clear in the change log, or it has to be communicated in the documentation. So again, it's not once that has been created, it's like a Bible. Everyone would have to go to that document. Do we need reference? Do we need clarity or whatnot? So that's what I think.
Okay. I don't remember this. Is it a different question or is it an addition to what I asked?
It's basically an addition on answer to what you asked. I'm basically topping off what Mark said. with the design system I worked on, a lot of the notes or that's the documentation was done in Git. So any change I made there was a visualized, I think some version control attached to it as well. But there were a lot of release notes that were coming out when any change was made. And if it was recommended by, sometimes recommendations could come from the developer or maybe from the designer who has probably gotten feedback from a usability test or something. And once that is there, like Max was saying, it's basically, once it's there, it's absolute. So everybody goes to it to actually get a sense of what changes has been made. So that was, in my experience, what was being used. So there wasn't any there was always a shared understanding as far as what was in the system. It wasn't fully complete, but the one we had actually made sense. And every time any change needed to happen or any record to be made, everybody was in the know. So that's one approach that was being used. I think it was Git that was being used for that. I don't know how it was set up, but it was really helpful. There was no confusion as to what changes needed to be made or who was in the know or who wasn't. So yeah.
Okay, let me clarify my question again. So I sent two things in the chat. So the first one is what I meant. So in Figma, right, when you are trying to group together the iconography, so it can easily be switched between, you use the first one I sent, the first naming convention I sent, right? But when you export it, it doesn't export it in like as the first one. When you use the first one, the first format, it exports it into folders, and then once you get to the actual icon, you have the name of the icon itself, which is in this case icon.svg. So my question was, the only time where it actually uses the naming convention you use in the Figma is if you use something else other than that, something else that is not a slash, right? So my question is, in this case where naming convention in the Figma is the first one, but in the case where you export it, it becomes just the icon.svg. How does the developer and the designer work together to ensure that in the future, once they want to communicate or speak to that very icon, they have a shared understanding? Maybe that has to do with the documentation, but I just want to make sure you get my question clearly. Yeah, Max.
Yes, Sam. I think in building that, I'm speaking from a developer's point of view. In building the system like that, we don't really, there has to be some sort of naming convention when it comes to organizing the icons and whatnot. But what we call that in, let's say, the design toolkit will be different from what exactly the file name is. But the way we manage the files will be, let's say we are using we are using some content management system to manage all the icons and all that. We could call it any name, but when you want to use it in any project or project that we're working on, there's some sort of abstraction. So we are going to go with the name that we have it on the document. Let's say it's icon X. That's what we are going to call it in code. But a link to icon X is not, or making reference to icon, then that file wouldn't be maybe X. It would be something else. But we know that when you call that icon X in our project, it leads to that particular icon that we are talking about here. I don't know whether it's clear.
Oh, I get it. So yeah. Basically, the naming convention and the design tool doesn't really matter a lot in terms of the coding or the development side.
Not really, because as I said, there's some sort of question. So it could be that wherever we are storing the file, we have come up with a given naming convention as well. But when it comes to writing the code, I don't think we are going to make reference to the exact name that, unless it's written on the document or in the document that is the name we have to call the icon when we are using it. But if that's not the case, how the icon is stored or kept would be different from the name that we call the icon when we want to use it in code and when we want to make reference to that in the document.
Okay. Makes a lot of sense. All right, cool. Thanks.
Yeah. So I think the graph just mentioned something. Zeppelin. So Zeppelin would help with. Zeppelin is a tool, another tool that designers and developers can use to kind of solve this problem. However, if you don't want to use Zeppelin, or probably insist on naming it the right way, what you can do is to name the icon itself. So you see the message that you sent, it says icon.svg. So instead of saying icon.svg, you could probably use acronyms. So DK for dark, and then L for line, and then 32 for, or XX for the size, right? So you could, instead of replacing, putting the icon itself, you could just put the naming convention that you want to export it as over there at the end of it. However, I can the Figma lots here can help if there's actually a solution for Sam's problem.
I think for it's not really about the it's mainly about just trying to make sure whatever it is, it's the communication with the dev is clear, so there's no miscommunication. I think that's where for me my problem, the challenge is it's because I know well I think that's my main challenge.
If it's about communication, then I think Zeppelin is a great tool for you to use.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
The graph.
Yeah, you dey hear me?
Yeah, we did hear you, boss.
Okay, so Sam, you for check Zeppelin out because I currently use it for hand with the team I'm working with, and it's really super helpful because when it comes to some of these documentations, I think Zeppelin does a good job handling that because unlike Figma, where sometimes if you are not on the organization plan, for instance, currently we have this organization plan. So let's say if I'm making a change on a particular design, it works more like it. So I can create a branch, make those changes, add people to review changes. So it could be the developers or the stakeholders. So if you have that particular plan, you don't need it. You don't need Zeppelin for those kind of like changes because then it will inform the developers that you've made this particular change. You can add notes to as well. But with Zeppelin, I think Zeppelin, when you look at the handoff, especially from Figma to the developer, sometimes you have to like always tell them, oh, okay, you made this particular change. And then when you send them the link, it's very difficult for they to actually go to where you want them to see. But with Zeppelin, there's this change log and all of that. So when they go on that particular platform, it's like you have this whole the design that you see is the updated version. If you want to see the old version, it's right beside it where you can actually switch. You have this change logs too as well. Like I said, you can add your comment. So with communication, if you want to really handle that particular barrier, I think Zeppelin is a good tool for that particular barrier.
Yeah, man. All right, cool. Thanks.
Yeah. Wait, one more thing too for developers if they don't want to use Zeppelin. So it has this feature where you can export your style guides, your color, whatever spacing. They have tokens too as well. So if you make a particular change in Figma and you export it, you can link the master component or whatever to your code base. So this is where your developers need to come on board. You actually talk to them, they link it. So they link it in such a way that when you make changes, it actually refers them to the code and it makes those changes. So it's up to them to actually push it to the main code base. that's one thing I feel like it was super cool for the developers when it comes to actually merging some of these changes into the main code base. So you can also look at that because they have like these cool integrations with other softwares where you can, frameworks where you can link them. So yeah, that's for the developers.
Um, does anyone else have any questions they'd like to ask before we wrap up? Okay. Thank you everyone for joining, and thank you Roxanne for making the time to come on to talk to us about design systems. We know that today's a Saturday, and then there are lots of things that you could be doing, but you decided to dedicate time to come on here to talk to us. We really appreciate it. So, thank you very much for your time. We I've been able to record the session. Hopefully,
No, you're
it's
welcome.
recorded very well, and then there aren't any glitches. So like after the session, I'll just go over to make sure everything is okay, and then if everything is fine, we'll go ahead and share it on our YouTube channel. So please stay tuned for that. But if there's anything, we'll just keep everyone updated in the Telegram channel. Okay, so thank you everyone for showing up. Once again, thank you Roxanne. We really appreciate it. Oh, and sorry, before we go to, I think we have two more sessions
No,
coming up till end of year. I think we have
no
two
urgent.
in. I
I
think we
know how
have.
long this has been coming. So.
Yeah, it's been a while. Oh, Charlie, let me me or Sammy.